Hello, my name is Sarah. Last Tuesday morning, my sister called and told me our father had died overnight. She said the funeral was on Friday. She said he'd left everything to her, and nothing to me. Her voice was calm, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just smiled quietly. Because while she was burying him with her words, my father was standing right beside me, breathing, alive. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a lie. It was a plan. Before we go on, tell me, what time are you listening and where are you right now? Because what happened next made me question family, silence, and how far betrayal is willing to go. The morning started the same way most do. Quiet, familiar, just the dull hum of the fridge and the slow drip of the coffee machine. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile, trying to remember what I had to do today. There was a yellow sticky note stuck to the fridge door with my handwriting, something about Dad's prescription refill and the plumber coming to check the basement pipe again. Dad was in the living room, sitting in his recliner, flipping through the newspaper like always, even though his eyes barely focused on the print anymore. He had that old navy jacket on, the one with the frayed cuffs and the stitched-up pocket from when I tried to sew it back together. He asked without looking up, "Did you see where I left the remote last night?" I didn't answer right away. I was pouring his coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and the sound of it filling the mug felt louder than usual. I placed it on the counter and said, "Check the couch cushions, Dad." He grunted in acknowledgement. Normal. So achingly normal. The phone rang. My cell. I almost didn't answer. It was early, and my hands were still damp from rinsing a dish, but the screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Erin, my sister. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and picked up. "Hello." Her voice was clipped, measured, like she was reading from a script she had written in her head the night before. "Hey, just wanted to let you know, Dad passed away last night." I stood there, staring at the coffee still steaming on the counter. "What?" "The funeral's on Friday. I've already taken care of everything. The will's been processed. He left everything to me. I figured you should hear it from me first before the lawyer calls." There was a beat of silence. No sigh, no awkward pause. Just her breathing, like this was a routine call. She kept talking. "He wanted it this way, okay? Don't make it harder than it is. I'm not doing this to fight." And just like that, she ended the call. No, "How are you?" No, "I'm sorry." It was like someone had drawn a line through my existence with a single stroke. I set the phone down on the counter, carefully, like it was fragile. My hand stayed hovering above it for a second, unsure whether I had imagined all of that. In the living room, Dad cleared his throat. "You okay in there?" he called. I turned my head slowly. He was still in his chair, still alive, still breathing. "I'm fine," I said. He was flipping the page in the paper, squinting at the crossword. "You find the remote?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He nodded like that was the end of the conversation and took a sip of his coffee. I went back to the kitchen table and sat down, not because I was tired, but because I suddenly didn't know what to do with my body. I could still feel the heat from the phone on my palm. Erin hadn't asked how he was. She hadn't asked anything. That wasn't shock. That was planning. That was a decision made long ago, delivered without hesitation. She had buried him, in her head, on paper, in some fabricated ceremony, and didn't even think I deserved a say. But I didn't react, didn't yell, didn't call her back. Because the truth was, reacting would mean she had power. Instead, I sat quietly, folded my hands in my lap, and looked across the room at the man they claimed was dead. His hands trembled a little as he turned the newspaper, but his eyes were still bright. He was still here. And yet, someone had already written him off. I didn't correct her. I didn't even mention the call to him. I knew if I said something now, I'd be the one accused of being unstable, dramatic, imagining things. I could hear it already. "Are you okay, Sarah? Maybe you need to talk to someone." So I chose silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in the world, but in me. I wasn't going to defend myself. Not yet. I wasn't going to ask why she did it. I already knew she would never say the truth. I would wait, and I would watch. Because if Erin wanted a show, I'd give her one, from a front row seat. I stayed where I was after the call ended, not frozen, not stunned, just still. The house kept moving around me. The refrigerator clicked. The clock over the sink ticked forward like nothing had changed. Dad shuffled from the living room into the kitchen, jacket still on, pausing to look out the window as if checking the weather might explain the silence. "Do you want eggs, or should I just do toast?" he asked. "Toast is fine," I said. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. He nodded and opened the bread drawer, moving slowly, carefully. Watching him felt strange now, like I was seeing him through glass. The lie had already escaped this house. I could feel it traveling, settling into other people's mouths, other living rooms. Inside these walls, he was alive. Outside, he was already gone. I rinsed my mug and set it in the rack. That was when my phone vibrated again. Not a call this time. A voicemail notification. I didn't rush to listen. I wiped the counter first, straightened the mail, did things that required my hands. Then I pressed play. "Sarah, honey, I just heard about your dad. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, let us know. We'll be thinking of you." It was my aunt. Her voice carried that practiced softness people use when they believe they're speaking to someone fragile. She said it all gently, as if I might break. I saved the message. I didn't delete it. I didn't cry. The phone buzzed again. Another message, then another. Condolences, offers of prayers, statements that assumed facts I hadn't been given a chance to confirm. Dad buttered his toast and sat down at the table across from me. "Your cousin still coming by later?" he asked. "I'm not sure," I said. That wasn't a lie. After he finished eating, he carried his plate to the sink and rinsed it, humming under his breath. When he left the kitchen, I finally opened my email. At the top of my inbox was a forwarded message. The subject line read, "Service details." It was written in formal language, the kind meant to sound respectful while keeping everything clean and distant. Friday, 2 o'clock. A chapel across town I recognized but had never discussed with anyone. Parking instructions included. Flowers suggested in lieu of food. There was a list of names copied at the bottom. Family, friends, the funeral home coordinator. My name wasn't there. I read it twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because omission has its own weight. It presses down quietly. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it to Dad. I archived it and took a screenshot, then another. I saved everything. By then, the pattern was clear. The call hadn't been the beginning. It was a notification. The machine was already running, gears turning smoothly, each message reinforcing the next. This wasn't grief spilling out. It was execution. Dad came back into the room, keys in his hand. "We still need to swing by the pharmacy before lunch," he said, and I promised I'd look at that leaky faucet again. "We can go after," I told him. "No rush." He smiled, relieved, and hung his jacket over the back of the chair instead of wearing it. I noticed that too. I didn't tell him what was happening, not because I was scared, because once I said it out loud, I would lose control over how it spread. I needed to see where it went on its own. Silence wasn't denial, it was surveillance. I listened. I watched timestamps stack up. I paid attention to who spoke, who didn't, and how quickly the story settled into place without resistance. By noon, Half the family believed my father was already gone, and not one of them had asked me how I was holding up. I stepped outside with Dad just after lunch. The air had warmed up, but he still wore that old navy jacket like it was armor. He moved slowly, carefully, the way people do when they've lived long enough to know their steps matter. I helped him into the car and buckled my seatbelt without saying much. We were headed to the grocery store. Milk, paper towels, his usual box of brand cereal. Errands that should have been ordinary. And yet, sitting behind the wheel, I felt like I was driving through two different realities. Inside the car, my father, alive, humming quietly to a tune on the radio, asking if we had any stamps left at home. Outside the car, a version of the world where he had already been buried. As we pulled into the store's parking lot, the contrast became sharper. I parked near the front to make it easier for him. He insisted on walking in on his own while I waited in the car. Said he needed to stretch his legs. I let him go. He was always stubborn about proving he could still do things himself. While he was inside, I scrolled through my phone again. I didn't open any new messages. I just watched them come in. More condolences, more people gently reminding me they were thinking of me. No one asked what had happened. No one questioned the timing. They just accepted the script. Someone tapped lightly on my window. I looked up. It was a woman I recognized from church, maybe mid-60s, warm eyes, the kind that always looked like they were about to offer you a casserole. She mouthed, "I'm so sorry," through the glass. I rolled the window down halfway. "I just heard," she said, voice soft. "I didn't want to bother you, just, if you need anything." I thanked her. I smiled the way people do when they're trying to hold the world in place. She reached out and gently touched my forearm. He was a kind man. I nodded. She meant it. But she was speaking like he was gone. I let the moment pass. I didn't correct her, not because I couldn't, but because I realized she wasn't repeating Aaron's story. She was participating in it. That's what made it real. The lie didn't need to be believed by me. It only needed others to carry it forward. Dad came out with a small paper bag in hand and waved, unaware. On the drive home, he chatted about the price of eggs. I nodded along, watching the houses blur by. The world outside kept turning. It didn't seem to notice it was spinning on a false orbit now. Back in the driveway, he went inside first. Said he was going to check the mail. I stayed in the car. I didn't turn off the engine. I didn't move. I just sat there, phone in my lap, eyes unfocused. That was when it started to settle in. Aaron hadn't just lied. She had staged a funeral. And like any good performance, it needed a crowd. It needed witnesses. It needed grief to be performed loudly enough that no one would question the details. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. The hardest part wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was sitting there in the car and realizing that no one had even paused to ask me if I was okay. Not really. They were just following a current that Aaron had directed with precision. I thought about the language she used in the call, in the email, formal, scripted, like she had copied it from a guide. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about control. Control over memory, over legitimacy, over who got to be seen as the daughter who mattered. I watched my own reflection in the rearview mirror. No tears, just clarity. That was when it hit me. The lie didn't need me to believe it. It only needed enough people to repeat it. The sun had shifted, slanting across the kitchen table in long lines by the time I sat down again. I hadn't said much all afternoon, not to Dad, not to myself. The TV murmured in the background while he dozed off in his chair, still wearing that old canvas jacket, like it meant nothing. I carried my coffee to the dining table. The stack of manila folders in the side drawer hadn't been touched in years. Bills, tax records, copies of old ID cards. Things families don't think they'll ever need until they're desperate. I pulled them out carefully, lining them up like I was preparing for a test. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I'd know if something was missing. And something was. The healthcare directive folder, the one we'd updated together 2 winters ago after Dad's second fall. That was gone. So was the power of attorney form we'd filled out at the library with the notary, the one Dad insisted on naming me for. Because Aaron can be dramatic, he'd said, half laughing. In its place, an envelope I didn't recognize. My name wasn't on it. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Not yet. I slipped it back into the drawer, closed it gently, and reached for my laptop. Dad was still snoring softly, the TV humming about a car insurance deal he'd never call about. I took my coffee, went into the small home office off the hallway, and dialed the bank. Just routine, I told myself. The wait time was short. A polite young man answered and confirmed the account number. Then he paused. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I see a note on this account. For security, I'm only allowed to speak with the authorized contact listed. Is this Aaron?" I didn't answer right away. "No," I said finally. "This is Sarah, his daughter." "Right, so unfortunately, the account is now restricted to the primary decision maker. Is there anything else I can help with today?" I ended the call without responding. I sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle in. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, I didn't even blink. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and pulled up the number for Dad's primary care office. After 2 rings, a recorded voice greeted me, followed by a receptionist who sounded rushed. "I just had a question about a recent appointment," I said. "Can I get the patient's name and date of birth?" I gave it to her. She clicked around, then said, "I'm sorry, we can't disclose any information to you. You're not listed as an approved contact on file." I stared at the muted computer screen, then thanked her and hung up. So, that's how far she'd already gone. It wasn't just one call or one lie or one desperate play to grab attention. It was a system. A web of slow, quiet paperwork, changing locks I didn't know existed until I was already locked out. Back at the kitchen doorway, Dad was still dozing, unaware that someone else had quietly taken his place in the eyes of every system that mattered. I looked at him and thought about saying something, about laying it all out on the table and letting the horror of it hit us both at once. But I didn't, because once I told him, I couldn't untell it. Once he knew, Aaron would know we knew, and whatever came next, it would come fast and hard. We'd lose control of the one thing we still had, time. I walked slowly back to the table and sat down again. My coffee had gone cold. I opened the drawer one more time, stared at the unfamiliar envelope, and left it where it was. There's a line people cross when they start planning your life for you without asking if you're even still living it. By the time the sun dipped low, I understood something chilling. She hadn't just announced my father's death. She'd already replaced him. The house settled into evening the way it always did, slowly and without ceremony. Lamps replaced daylight. The refrigerator hummed. Dad shuffled down the hallway in his socks, pausing every few steps like he was listening for something he couldn't quite hear. I watched him from the kitchen, my hands resting on the edge of the table. He looked smaller at night, not weak, just unguarded. The kind of unguarded that comes from believing you're safe in your own home. That was what made my chest tighten. He stopped at his bedroom doorway and glanced back at me. "You want some tea?" he asked. "I'm making a cup." "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. He nodded and disappeared into his room. I heard the kettle a moment later, the familiar clink of porcelain. Ordinary sounds. The kind you don't realize you're memorizing until you're afraid you might lose them. I stood there too long, rehearsing words I didn't say out loud. "Dad, There's something you need to know. Dad, Aaron's been making decisions. Dad, people think you're gone. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Each one carried a consequence I couldn't measure. I pictured the look on his face if I told him everything. Confusion first, then hurt, then fear. And once that door opened, it wouldn't close again. So when he came back into the kitchen with his mug, smiling softly like nothing in the world had shifted, I swallowed the truth and asked him how the tea was. "Too strong," he said, chuckling. "Always overdo it." Guilt has a sound. It's quiet, but it stays with you. After he went to bed, I sat alone at the table under the dim overhead light. The house felt different now, tighter, like the walls were listening. I checked my phone, not expecting anything, and that's when I saw the voicemail notification. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Carol from Home Care Plus. We're calling to confirm transportation arrangements for Mr. Harris next week. We spoke with Aaron earlier today and just wanted to finalize pickup times." I listened to it twice, then a third time. Transportation, care arrangements, plans already moving forward without a single conversation with me, or with him. I didn't call back. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, and I didn't trust my voice. Instead, I sat there and let the weight of it press down on me. This wasn't just about reputation anymore, or money, or control in some abstract sense. This was about where my father would be taken, who would make decisions for him, and how quickly his autonomy could disappear if I stayed quiet. And I had stayed quiet. I'd told myself it was patience, that it was strategy, that waiting kept him safe. But sitting there, replaying that voicemail, I felt something crack. What if my silence wasn't protecting him? What if it was giving her room to move? I blamed myself then, for hesitating, for confusing calm with caution, for thinking peace meant safety. I'd always been the one who smoothed things over, who waited for the right moment. I told myself that was maturity. Now it felt like a mistake I couldn't undo. I went to the hallway and stood outside Dad's bedroom. The door was open just enough for me to see him lying there, asleep, his breathing slow and even. He looked content, trusting. I rested my hand against the doorframe and closed my eyes. There was no clean choice left, no option that didn't cost something. If I spoke, I might shatter his sense of security. If I stayed silent, I might lose him anyway, piece by piece, decision by decision. That was the night I realized silence wasn't keeping him safe anymore. It was helping someone else take him from me. After midnight, the house settled into a silence that wasn't restful. It was hollow. Not the kind of quiet that comes when everyone's finally asleep, but the kind that presses in from the walls, like the air itself is waiting for you to break. I couldn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, arms wrapped around my waist, my back hunched forward like I was bracing for a blow that never came. The hallway light filtered in faintly under my door. Somewhere down the hall, my father was asleep, still breathing, still here, still unaware of how close he'd come to vanishing in every legal, medical, and practical sense. I had let it get this far. Every instinct I had screamed to act days ago, but I hadn't. I'd watched, I'd waited, I'd listened. And now, she'd moved the chess pieces while I was too busy convincing myself the game hadn't started yet. I stood slowly, like the air had weight, crossed the hall and paused outside his door. I didn't open it. I just stood there, barefoot on the cold floor, listening for his breathing. It came steady, light, familiar. I pressed my palm flat against the doorframe to ground myself. This used to be simple, I thought. When we were younger and everything in this house had a place. She was the one who wanted out. I was the one who stayed. She hated the responsibility. I absorbed it without question. Maybe that was the first mistake. assuming proximity meant ownership. I stepped away. In the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The overhead light was too harsh. It made every line show. My face didn't look sad. It looked used up, not in the dramatic sense, just tired, like a coat worn through at the elbows. I leaned in, studied my eyes. They looked like our mother's. And maybe that was part of the problem. Erin always said I looked like her, acted like her, stayed too long in places I wasn't wanted. She called it loyalty. I called it holding things together. And now, the only thing holding me together was inertia. I splashed cold water on my face, then turned off the light and went back to my room. I sat down, pulled my legs up onto the bed, and wrapped the comforter around me without lying down. The weight of it helped, just barely. A part of me considered letting go, letting her have it. The story, the house, the legal power, the name on the records. Let her manage his care, his memory, his death, whenever it actually came. Maybe it wasn't mine to fight for anymore. Maybe fighting just made everything worse. That thought didn't feel like surrender. It felt like fatigue wearing a mask. Still, it stayed with me a long time. I must have drifted into a half-sleep, because the next thing I knew, I heard the hallway creak. I blinked. The clock said 3:47 a.m. I got up and cracked the door. Dad was standing in the kitchen, barefoot in his robe, filling a glass of water from the fridge. The hum of the appliance was the only sound. He moved slow, like always, but with intent. I watched from the shadows as he placed the glass on the table, opened the cupboard, took out 2 plates, then paused. He stared at them a second, then laughed quietly to himself. "Wrong cabinet," he muttered. Then he put the plates back and pulled down the cereal bowls. That was all, nothing more. But it hit me with a quiet force I wasn't prepared for. He was still here, still himself, still remembering the rhythm of this house, even if it came with missteps. I stepped back into my room before he saw me, closed the door softly, and for the first time that night, I felt something shift. She hadn't taken everything, not yet. This wasn't about control anymore, not really. It was about consent, his, mine, what we chose, what got taken when no one spoke up. That clarity didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the damage already done, but it gave me a point to pivot from. I wasn't going to explode or throw accusations or scream into the void. I was going to move, quietly, deliberately, like she had, but in a different direction. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began a new folder. I didn't name it proof or evidence or revenge. I named it truth. Because for the first time in days, I knew the difference between all those things. I still didn't know how I was going to stop her, but for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to disappear quietly. The light outside had shifted into that soft, pale blue that only shows up on mornings like this. I'd been awake since before the sun, sitting by the window, sipping coffee gone cold, watching the sky not because it mattered, but because it grounded me. Today was the funeral, or, more accurately, the performance. I moved through the house with a kind of quiet choreography. Nothing rushed, nothing out of place. My dress was simple, dark gray, not black. No jewelry except my watch. Hair pulled back, low and loose. I wasn't there to draw attention. I was there to hold space. At the kitchen table, I laid out the folder again, not to double-check. I'd already read every line. It was ritual now. Control in a morning built to erase it. Inside the folder were copies, just copies, of the paperwork I'd quietly requested and finally received the night before. A change in medical directive. A signature time-stamped one day after my sister told the family he was no longer able to decide anything for himself. A bank notification addressed to her as primary contact. A pharmacy note about authorized caregiver pickup that didn't list me. None of it screamed, but all of it whispered the same thing. She had planned this long before anyone else had noticed. And I wasn't supposed to notice, not today. I tucked the folder back into my bag and zipped it up. It made a soft sound, final in a way that surprised me. The silence in the house wasn't the same as last night. It wasn't fragile, it was full, heavy, but steady. Dad was still asleep. I'd checked on him already, quietly. He was snoring. That gentle snore that used to annoy me as a kid and now felt like proof of life. He didn't know what today was supposed to mean. That was a mercy, in its own way. At 8:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a calendar alert, not mine, the shared family one. Funeral 10 a.m., Trinity Chapel, meet out front, dress formal, Erin will speak first. It was like reading a memo about someone else's movie. Erin will speak first. Of course she would. She'd always been the one to step into a room like she owned the air in it, and she was counting on me to sit quietly in the second row, nodding, letting the story go unchallenged. But not today. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to be seen. I picked up my phone and dialed one more number before heading out. A quiet voice answered. The receptionist from the lawyer's office I'd visited weeks ago, before any of this exploded. "Yes," I said calmly. "I just wanted to confirm that the revised documents were received. No, I'm not asking for them to be filed yet. Just confirming they're complete and time-stamped." She said they were, and that was enough. Outside, the air was crisp. Not cold, but sharp enough to wake you up from the inside. I slid into my car, the fabric of my dress catching slightly on the seat, and sat for a moment before turning the key. It wasn't fear I felt. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was focus. The kind that comes when you've finally accepted what you're not going to do. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to interrupt. I wasn't going to try to convince people who had already decided what to believe. I was going to show up, fully, present. And if she wanted to tell the story, she was going to have to do it while looking at someone who knew it wasn't true. Because silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's just loading. As I drove, I played out the scenes in my head. The chapel, the guests, the careful tears, the lines she'd rehearsed. I could practically hear her voice. Dad was the strongest man I ever knew. Even when he couldn't speak anymore, I knew what he wanted. He told me things he couldn't tell anyone else. I could feel how she would look at the crowd, nod at me. I could already see the nods, the sympathy, the affirmation. But I didn't flinch at the thought. Because none of them mattered. Not really. She could spin her version for them. Mine wasn't for them. Mine was for him. And for me. When I pulled into the parking lot of the funeral home, I didn't shut the car off right away. I sat there, engine running, watching the people gather at the entrance. Some familiar, some not. All dressed in varying shades of formal, polite grief. I took one breath, deep and intentional, and turned off the ignition. By the time I parked outside the funeral home, I knew she was counting on my silence one last time. I stepped out of the car and let the door close behind me without slamming it. The sound was soft, respectful, exactly what was expected today. The chapel was just ahead, its stone walls casting long shadows across the sidewalk as the sun inched higher. People were already gathering inside. I could see them through the open double doors. Some standing, some seated, many murmuring in that low, hushed way people do when grief meets obligation. No one noticed me as I walked in, which was exactly how she wanted it. I didn't bother scanning for familiar faces. I knew they were there, people we grew up with, neighbors, distant relatives, a few colleagues of hers who'd flown in just to show their faces. It didn't matter who they were, not really. What mattered was that I didn't exist to them today. Not in the story she'd written, I took a seat toward the back on the left. Not in the shadows, but close enough to them. The front of the chapel was arranged exactly how I knew she'd plan it. An altar of curated grief. White lilies in tall vases. A framed photo of Dad from 5 years ago. The one she always used because it made him look dignified, remote, like a man above needing help. A closed casket. Of course, a memory, not a man. I didn't fidget. I didn't shift in my seat. I watched. And then she stepped up. Erin wore black, naturally, but not understated. Sleek, fitted, with just enough sheen to catch the light as she walked. Her hair perfectly styled, her makeup soft and calculated. She looked like someone giving a eulogy for a senator, not our father. Her voice was calm, measured. "We're here today not just to say goodbye," she began, "but to honor a man who shaped lives, who taught us strength, consistency, and the value of foresight." There it was, the beginning of the rewrite. I listened as she talked about his wisdom in preparing for his final years, about how he made hard choices early, so no one else had to carry that burden. She looked down, let a beat of silence hang, then glanced back up. "He told me he didn't want to linger, he didn't want confusion. He asked me to make sure his voice would still be heard, even when he couldn't speak." I didn't move. Inside, something tightened. But I kept my face still. She wasn't lying, not outright. She was stitching real moments to false narratives. That was her genius. Then came the shift. "I know some decisions may have surprised people," she said, her tone softening into concern. "But my father and I were aligned. We talked about everything, and I think it's important to remember that sometimes grief distorts memory. It's easy to imagine things that didn't happen, or forget the conversations you weren't part of." A few heads turned. Subtle. Enough. She smiled briefly. "Some people might feel excluded or confused, but I can assure you everything was done with clarity and love." I heard the words, but I didn't feel them. They weren't for me. They were about me. She wasn't mourning. She was securing a legacy, one she wrote herself. Then she paused. No one spoke. No one moved. I could feel eyes shifting, not directly at me, but toward me. The kind of glance people give when they're checking if a rumor is true. I could have stood up then. I could have said something, anything, a denial, a correction, a demand, but I didn't. Instead, I waited. And in that pause, something shifted, not in me, but around me. Because down the center aisle, from the hallway where guests weren't supposed to linger, came a sound no one expected. A cane, tapping rhythmically against the tile. 3 beats. Then a pause, 3 more. Heads turned. A whisper started, a breath caught, and then there he was, my father, alive, moving slow but steady, wearing the same tan jacket he wore the day this all began. A little wrinkled, a little too thin in the arms, but unmistakably him. For a second, no one reacted, as if their eyes hadn't caught up to their ears. As if the presence of the dead walking into their carefully arranged grief didn't compute. Erin froze. I didn't need to look at her. I felt her lock up from across the room. Her breath stopped mid-sentence. Her body didn't shift, but her control snapped like a thread stretched too far. Dad walked to the front. No help, no words. He stood by the casket he wasn't in. And then he looked at her, not me, her, with calm eyes, and said, "I'm not dead, and I never asked you to bury me." Gasps echoed around the room. No one moved. No one even tried to fill the silence. Because that sentence didn't need follow-up. That was the truth. And the lie had nowhere left to stand. The chapel didn't erupt. It deflated. No one clapped. No one cried out. No one demanded an answer. People just shifted. A few turned away, pretending to read their programs again. Some stared at the casket as if trying to will it to open. to somehow make the moment make sense, but most avoided our eyes entirely. The air had changed. Something unspoken had split right down the center of the room, and everyone was scrambling to figure out where to stand. Erin didn't speak again. She didn't look at me or at him. She simply stepped down from the front and moved quietly through the side aisle. No limp, no tears, no stutter in her gait. She held her poise, but it was a different kind now, like someone retreating from a fire she lit herself. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Dad and I didn't say anything either. We simply turned and left, moving together at a pace that didn't ask for attention. The kind of walk that makes no statement but still says everything. Outside, the sky was clear, almost aggressively blue. The parking lot was quiet. I helped him into the car, adjusting the seatbelt gently across his shoulder. Once we were in and the doors shut, he let out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in his chest for a week. We didn't drive off right away. We just sat there, surrounded by silence and sunlight, while the chapel behind us swallowed the remnants of a funeral that never was. Back home, he made tea. He moved slowly, but with purpose. The way he stirred the spoon against the side of the mug told me he was grounding himself in something familiar. I didn't interrupt. We sat in the living room, curtains drawn halfway. The house felt different. Not cleansed, not healed, but honest. And that was enough. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "How long has this been going on?" I didn't lie. "A while," I said quietly. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. His nod was small. He took another sip, then set the mug down. "She always was the louder one," he said, more to himself than me. We didn't pick apart the past. We didn't relive every manipulation or accusation or whispered dismissal. We didn't list what had been lost, though we both knew the list would have been long. Later that week, I called the lawyer. Quiet conversations, necessary documents, clear boundaries, no threats, just clarity. Medical authority was formally reassigned. Financial access corrected. A few raised eyebrows from professionals, but no real resistance. Paperwork didn't argue. It just sorted truth from fiction. Erin didn't call. She didn't show up. There was no apology, no explanation, no attempt to rewrite the rewrite. And I didn't chase any of that, because I didn't need it anymore. What I needed was what I had now, a life that fit inside my own hands. A space where my voice wasn't always second-guessed. A relationship with my father built on reality, not curated memories. I didn't get the house, or the money, or the role of hero daughter that only exists in TV dramas. What I got was different. I got to keep my name clean. I got to be present. I got to stop apologizing for existing just because someone else had filled the silence longer. That evening, I watched him from the hallway as he walked into the living room, removed his jacket, and hung it neatly on the hook by the door. The same jacket from that first morning, the one he wore like armor without realizing it. He didn't glance at me. He didn't say anything. But that small motion, it told me everything. He wasn't waiting to be taken care of. He was just living. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't standing outside the frame of the picture. I didn't smile because I won. I smiled because for the first time I wasn't invisible anymore.